Hi, I'm really sorry I can't be with you this morning. We've got Senate budget hearing and I want to make sure we get our full funding this year. But I'm really glad that the Animal Health and Food Safety Division is doing this series of technical seminars. I want to congratulate you for your leadership and for all the important work that you do every day of the year for our farming and ranching community and for all Californians. I'm especially excited to hear that you're going to hear from the Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation about our climate smart agriculture programs. You know, I pointed out at a recent conversation that I had with this year's leadership class that the future for CDFA is happening now. We're all deeply engaged in the conversation about climate change. We know the huge impacts that climate change will have on agriculture in California. When you think about the health of the livestock in this state, clearly climate change will be an impact. But I'm also thrilled with how we are looking at climate change and the solutions that can come from agriculture. And that's what you'll be hearing about today, specific to the dairy program. We are putting out grant dollars from the Climate Change Investment Fund for dairy digesters on farms. These are there to generate renewable electricity that'll actually operate the farms and the dairies, but also renewable transportation fuels. The low carbon fuel standard is actually what makes the economics work on these even better. But we also have, knowing that not every size of dairy herd is going to be able to justify a dairy digester, an alternative manure management program. This is an especially important program because we know that there are areas of our state where we have a high number of dairy herds, where we're nutrient rich, but that nutrient is something very valuable. And if we can find a way to get the liquids out and put it into pellets as an example, we can move it to areas where they're supplementing the nutrients to grow their crops. That's just one way of looking at these programs of really getting waste out of our vocabulary and really thinking about all the byproducts that our cows provide and what's still really valuable and making sure that's generating a revenue stream for our dairy farmers. They need it right now. That program also works really well with the new program we launched this year, the Healthy Soils Program. That's selecting a series of practices on our farms and ranches where we can sequester carbon. Yes, agriculture is part of the solution. And it's a repositioning of agriculture in the hearts and minds of our consumers and neighbors all across California. We're excited to be a part of building up that organic matter in our soils, not just for climate resiliency, but also drought resiliency, because that kind of soil holds more water. That's important for our future when we know that we're going to have the dramatic shifts from drought to flood at any time of the year. Another program that's been very successful for us and oversubscribed every year is a program that we actually started at the beginning of the drought. It's funded with climate change investment dollars to help farmers on farm reduce their water use, reduce their energy use, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Tremendous program. We funded over 500 projects on over 100,000 acres, and the farmers really, really appreciate it. There are other programs funded in our rural areas where we're investing in replacing dirty old engines. Almost $100 million was put into that program last year. We have farmland and ranch land conservation easements funded through the Strategic Growth Council, $40 million a year. Tremendously important to keep that land in generational farming and ranching and avoid vehicle miles traveled because we're helping to keep our growth going up, not sprawling out. And finally, we have a new program over at the Energy Commission to help our food processing sector improve their energy efficiency and embrace a more sustainable future. These are programs that are new and different for us here at CDFA, but they really are making that connection to integrated resource management, to having everyone think about where's agriculture in this? How will it be impacted, but also how can agriculture be a part of the solution? It's a strategic pillar of the scoping plan, and I'm confident with all of us working together and learning from each other, we will have ways of getting the word out to our constituents in farm and ranch country. Thank you for all that you do every day, and thank you for your attendance at this technical seminar today. Have a great day.
market-based GHG emission limits. It's known as the cap and trade program. And it also authorizes CARB to develop and enforce regulations to meet that target reduction limit and maintain and continue the reductions beyond 2020. And in 2015, Governor Brown signed an executive order, which was to set new limits for GHG reductions, GHG emission reductions, and the limit was to reduce 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And he suggested 5 pillars how to get to that new target. And first was to reduce the petroleum use in car and trucks by 50% and increase the renewable portfolio of electricity sector by 50%, and then double the energy efficiency of existing buildings, manage farm, grazing land, and forest and wetlands, either to maintain as a carbon sink or to become a carbon sink, and then to reduce short-lived climate pollutants. So first of all, what is short-lived climate pollutants? As the name suggests, these are short-lived. They could be, their lifetime could be either 2 days to 2 decades, and then they disintegrate into either elemental gases. So they are a very strong, what we call as a climate enforcer. And their global warming potential is very high as compared to carbon dioxide, especially when we are looking at the time scale of 20 years. In general, they contribute about 40% of climate forcing. The main ones that we concentrate in the bill are methane, black carbon, and what we call fluorinated gases. And in 2014, Assembly Bill 605 required CARB to develop a plan to reduce these FLCPs. And in methane, why the dairy methane is important. So here we are talking about the inventory. Most of the dairy and livestock are the biggest source. They produce more than 50% of the California methane inventory. Out of that, 25% is manure and 20% is enteric. So you can say cows produce methane left and right, but we have to stand perpendicular to the cow. In 2015-16, Assembly Bill 1383 required to take whatever the suggestions were made in the report in SB 605. Required to adoption and implementation of FLPC strategies that were proposed in SB 605, and they set the limit of 40% for both methane and fluorinated gases, and 50% for black carbon. And from now onwards, we will be just talking about the dairy methane. And the bill also has a specific language for the dairy and livestock operations. And the bill also requires to evaluate the methane mitigation efforts by 2020 and report it to the legislature and to evaluate whether we need to regulate dairy industry for methane or not. And as it also requires, especially for dairy and livestock, that the reduction limit is 40% below 2013 level by 2030. The bill SB 1383 requires that the collaborating agencies, that would be CARB, CDFA, CEC, and CUPC, to write a report and recommend to the governor's office to recommend as a future policy refinements. So in this, the collaborating agencies have developed a working group that has 3 subgroups, and the members of these subgroups are state and federal agency experts, industry representatives, and utilities, and academic experts. They meet generally once a month, and recommendations are due fairly close to the end of the 2018 this year. And there are 3 subgroups. Subgroup 1 is concentrating or focusing on a non-digester project. Subgroup 2 works on digester projects. So there are 2 projects. I think my colleagues will say why there are 2, but I'm just going to say to mitigate this methane from the dairies, there are 2 broader pathways. Although whoever is working with the dairies know, other than milk, there is only one thing that's common among the California dairies, and that is they are all different. But to mitigate the methane, you can go either the digester pathway or there are alternate pathways. So these 2 subgroups work on these 2 different aspects. And then there are some research gaps. The third subgroup works on the research gaps and enteric fermentation. So I'm just going to quickly go over what these subgroups have been doing to date. So non-digester subgroups is working on identifying these technologies that are alternative to the digesters for their readiness, feasibility, and applicability in California. I mean, are they ready to deploy or not? And they are also looking at the pasture-based dairies and their applicability or the conversion from the conventional dairies to the pasture-based, especially in the Central Valley. They are also looking at the regulations, regulatory challenges on the existing practices, and what are the emerging technologies that can foster our objective to reduce the methane. They are also looking at environmental concerns and disadvantaged communities, and identifying the markets for byproducts from non-digester programs such as compost, biochar, and compost, and worm castings, biofertilizers. And the digester group is mainly focusing on infrastructure policies, how the biogas that is produced in digester, how it can be either used as an energy, what are the infrastructures there, or whether we convert it into renewable gas and inject it into the pipeline. So what are the infrastructure policies and requirements there? Procurement policies, funding source, and environmental policies. And they have also been looking at the opportunities and barriers, especially from a developer's perspective, and IOUs, investor-owned utilities. And they have been also looking at the market supply and demand for the biogas and transportation fuel, electricity generations, and what are the emerging technologies other than the digester that can be used for the biogas. And they have also been looking at different pathways where the biogas can be used and what are their environmental impacts. And the research subgroup have been looking at cataloging all the research gained so far, and especially the areas they are looking at is emission inventory and its accuracy, because there are researches and there are some gaps, and especially for the accuracy of the emissions. Air quality impacts, enteric fermentation, and by doing that, they're also trying to identify what are the gaps. And at this time, the CARB is accepting what we call requests for ideas. So they are requesting what are the research gaps and how to cover it. And with that, so far we have been talking about the policy side of it, but as Geeta mentioned, there are voluntary incentive programs to mitigate GHGs, and there are a number of programs that are underway, and two of those programs are being administered by CDFA, and two of my colleagues will be talking about that. And with that, I will give it to Roberta for the next program. Thank you.
So as Ravanit said, this is one of the voluntary incentive programs that we have. Me, Casey, and Milan will talk more in detail. So today I'm going to talk about one of the climate investment funds that is funded, the California Climate Investment Program. And this is the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program, or has been also called the DRDP. And this is managed by the California Department of Food and Agriculture and has been around since 2014. So, but before I start talking about the program in details, I'd like you just to give you a background of the California dairy industry, which will serve both for this program as well as for the AMP program that Ilan will be talking more in detail. So just to give you a background, California is ranked the #1 cream and milk producer in the United States. It has about 1.7 million milking cows and the same amount of heifers as replacement. They are distributed in 1,400 dairies across the state, and California produces about 20% of all the U.S. milk. So, although this is a huge industry, it's important for me to mention that 99% of these dairy farms are family-owned and operated. So, as Ravanit mentioned, the only thing that California dairies are equal is how they are different. So they can be different by several things. They can be different by the overall animal population. They can be different due to their dairying style, for example, if they're organic or conventional farming. They also can be different due to the climate and the environmental conditions of the region they are in. So by looking at this map, you can see that 91% of the state's dairy cows and 80% of the dairy farms are located in the Central Valley of California. These dairies are mainly equipped with three-stall barns and with flushing systems. Another 3% of the dairy state cows are in the North Coast region, in counties such as Humboldt, Marin, and Del Norte, and those cows are primarily on pasture. And the remaining 5.6% of the dairy cows are located in the Southern California, which includes Riverside, Imperial, and San Diego counties, and those cows are primarily in dry lots. So, since the majority of the cows are in three-stall barns and with flushing systems, you imagine that a lot of manure is being produced, collected, and stored every day. So with that, we'll have big anaerobic lagoons, which will give all the conditions for the formation of methane. And letting these lagoons open will not just only let the methane go into the atmosphere and contribute to climate change, as also the lagoons can be a source of offensive odors and some pollutant criteria. So how can we reduce methane? What is one of the strategies for reducing methane? One of these strategies is to build an anaerobic digester. So what is an anaerobic digester to start? So this is an anaerobic digester works as a bioreactor that captures methane, and it can be used to produce renewable natural gas, such it would work as the compressed natural gas that you see has from fossil fuels, or it also can be used to produce electricity. So you see this pathway here. But also, the dairy digester can produce other benefits that come from this side. So the digester effluent can come here and produce fertilizer. a very actually high-grade fertilizer concentrated, and the solids can produce compost, soil maintenance, and bedding for the livestock. So, and remember that not only this process can be done, as you'll be reducing methane also. And so with that, and taking consideration the magnitude of the industry and the state goals of reducing greenhouse gases from all sectors, our program was created with the objective of awarding competitive grants to California dairy operations and digester developers for the implementation of dairy digesters that result in early and long-term methane reduction. The process, though, is very competitive, especially right now with the increased interest of dairy farmers, digester developers, and of course, they receive more budget, so can spend more money. Hopefully this year we'll do again. So to this date, we have awarded $46.4 million to 24 projects. So I'll go in detail how did we spend this money. So in 2015, we have awarded 6 projects in an amount of $11.1 million, and all these projects are already completed. They were built with the purpose of electricity generation. In 2017, 18 projects were funded, and we have awarded them with $35.3 million. These are still under construction, but all of them are going to produce renewable natural gas as for fuel for transportation or for lowering ethanol production. To this date, we'll be able to award between $61 to $75 million, and we already have received 74 projects, which are being reviewed at this moment. So this is just in more detail the projects that were funded in 2017, but as I said before, although they are different developers and different ways of building, producing natural compressed gas, they all have just intentions. So here is the approximate location. It shows the approximate location of the projects that we have awarded to this date. So you can see that the points in red, pink, are the ones in 2015, and the ones in purple are the ones that are still under construction that were funded in 2017. You can see that all are located in the Central Valley, and by our estimates, our program has the potential of reducing 5.7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over a period of 10 years. We're getting there. So this is a picture of one of the digesters that was funded in 2015. And as I said, the 15 ones were built for electricity generation. And this is the Verway Hanford digester. You can see this is a style of digester in the Copper Lagoon digester, which is more than 90% of the digesters built so far in California. So about then the nitty-gritty of the program. So as I mentioned before, this year we'll be able to award $61 to $75 million. But however, applicants need to meet some requirements before we give them this money. So projects need to be up to $3 million or a maximum of 50%, or the award will be given to up to $3 million or 50% of the total cost of the project, whichever value is lower. Also, we require that at least 50% of the cost of the total cost of the project is in matching funds. So we provide half, they provide the other half, and they can provide more if they want. It's just the minimum is 50%. Of those, only 25% in-kind donation are accepted. And also, the maximum duration of the project is 2 years. So for example, if we close the contract in July 1st, 2018, they must have completed by June 30 of 2020. And just to give you an idea how this process works, it comes from the California Climate Investment, in a specific the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, administered by TGSA before it gets to the grant recipient. So one thing that is important to mention is that both us, CDSA, and the external panel of reviewers, which we make sure to make a fair process, unbiased. We have this external panel of reviewers, and that we are not only concerned with reducing greenhouse gases, we are also interested in see if this project and their construction and operation won't create other problems. For example, by producing some pollution criteria or degrading water quality, for example. So it's important for us that we don't create other problems while trying to reduce greenhouse gases, not only for the environment, for us, but also for the population of that region that the digesters are in. So one last slide, I would like to point that we have the key features on the program. So as Rajneesh mentioned a little bit, CARB helps us with the process. And this is like every applicant must submit to us the estimation of how much greenhouse gas will be reduced by the implementation of their project. So they use this a quantification methodology tool, which was developed especially for this program. Also, applicants must conduct community outreach and determine the potential adverse impact and commit to the mitigation measures they are telling us that they will. And they also are required to report the actual emission reductions that they are for a period of 5 years after the project is completed. So we can really see with real data how much they're reducing every day. We actually are receiving the first report of the reduction of greenhouse gases, and it's actually better than we thought. And as I said before, we are the project must meet strict environmental criteria for air and water, and we do a robust financial and scientific review before awarding any money to anybody. So now I'd like to invite Casey to talk a little bit about the lower carbon fuel standards and the biomass program. And thank you, Casey.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Roberta. What did I do? Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. And I'm just going to cover one slide at this point, but when we started this program, there were really only 17 digesters in the state. And a lot of those have been developed by dairymen who said, you know, we're kind of out on the cutting edge because we have an opportunity here. And then along with the secretary, we took a deep dive into examining, well, why don't we have more digesters in the state? And a lot of it, you know, broke down to a lot of the permitting and regulations. We really addressed a lot of that. And a lot of it, of course, comes down to the finances. And so we need to make sure that the biogas that's produced from the digesters have a home and that they have value and that, you know, we can capture that. So that is primarily, you know, one of the reasons now we're seeing we've essentially doubled the amount of digesters in the state. Of course, many of those are under construction now and they will be done in the next 2 years. But we're on a rapid escalation of the amount of digesters in our state. And so a lot of it is, you know, due to these policies and again from the leadership from the secretary. So yeah, a lot of interest now being paid across the nation, looking at what California is doing. And a lot of it has to do with these policies that set the stage to take advantage of the biogas. So, and the secretary mentioned that in her opening, the low carbon fuel standard is really now this key program that monetizes the value of the dairy biogas. And the low carbon fuel standard, the goal is to reduce the carbon intensity of the transportation fuel in the state writ large by 20% by 2020, which also really provides other benefits. I mean, we are really totally Rumpelstiltskin, turning straw into gold. This complements the other 80-32 measures, reduces petroleum dependency, reducing emissions of criteria pollutants. We can get those heavy, dirty diesel trucks off of Highway 99 using dairy biogas, moving the dairy trucks around on a day-to-day basis. And creating jobs. There's a lot of win-wins here. And so now this is actually happening. As we mentioned, the projects that we funded in last round are all going this renewable natural gas route. The problem with the low carbon fuel standard is that it's still a little bit uncertain, and that's why you're seeing, as Ravneet mentioned, all these policy efforts to ensure that this low carbon fuel standard is going to be there for the long run, and banks can use that to finance. So it's still a little more tenuous. The electricity route is probably a little bit more certain, but it does have the drawback of producing NOx emissions. So the low carbon fuel standard is the route for the renewable natural gas. And as I mentioned, it reduces the carbon intensity. The dairy biogas is among the lowest fuels. It has a negative carbon intensity that they can really capture value from. And some of our developers are saying they can get between $40 to $60 per MMBTU for the dairy biogas. ARB has a calculator on their website where developers can go in and actually estimate what revenue they might be able to generate. And that also depends on the carbon market itself. So it's a little, tenuous. The biomass is the other side, for the electricity side. And again, this is legislation, SB 1122 back in 2012, which actually requires the 3 independent operated utilities to procure bioenergy. And this is not just for dairy biogas, but also for forest waste and urban biomass as well. And what this does is, in these early digesters that came along, the dairymen were trying to negotiate with PG&E. How do you think that worked out? Okay. So this makes they're very set terms, and with set contracts, 10, 15, or 20 years, the dairyman is not having to go back every 5 years and renegotiate. And this gives them actually a pretty decent price. It's 18.37 cents. Right now, it can fluctuate over time. But again, there's tremendous policy effort to make sure, PG&E doesn't really like this program. So we're constantly working with our stakeholders to ensure this platform will exist as well. Because of now we have this requirement to reduce dairy biomethane, we need all the pathways, we need all the ways we can get there. So maintaining the biomass is also of primary importance. Now, whoops, I did it again. I'm going to turn it over to Milan, who will talk about what else we can do besides digest.
All right, thank you, Casey. All right, well, good morning. So I'm now going to talk about our other dairy methane incentive program, and that is the Alternative Manure Management Program, or AMMP, or AMP. So I hope everybody's amped up. Okay, so here we go. So what is AMP? So again, similar to our DDRDP program, we're focusing on the reduction of dairy methane from California dairy and livestock operations. And so for AMP, we're talking about non-digester projects like Ravneet mentioned earlier. We have the non-digester and the digester voluntary incentive program. And so some of the sort of non-digester practices would be things that we incentivize would be things like pasture-based management, salt separation, or converting from a conventional flush to a scrape system. And it's important to note that the salt separation or the conversion from flush to scrape needs to be in conjunction with some form of drying. So once you separate the solids or once you scrape the solids, what do you do with that? So you have to dry it in some fashion. So we have things like doing solar drying or some sort of composting. So these 3 are really the main practices that we incentivize through our AMP program. So just a little bit of background. So the AMP program is now in its 2nd solicitation. We're currently in the open solicitation process for 2018, but we did fund projects in the 2017 solicitation. And so this is sort of a map of the funded projects so far. And you can see that we awarded 18 different projects. And you'll see that most of them are in the Central Valley area. You'll see that we have 3 that are sort of in the coastal region, and then 15 of them in the valley. Specifically in this little cluster here, we have about 13 or so projects in this particular area that we funded. And we awarded $9.8 million first round, and that equates to about 328,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. The types of projects that we funded, like I mentioned, from the 3 eligible types of practices, in the beginning here, we had 10 projects that were flush to scrape conversions, 6 that used some sort of solid separation, 1 was a pasture-based, and then one that did a combination of practices. And so now, talking about this round, so before I actually talk about, so let me back up a minute. So the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program has been around since 2014-15. However, in the 2016-17 is when AMP came online, which was the first round. And so now the legislature is appropriating CDFA 1 pot of money for both dairy methane incentives, for both of our dairy methane incentive programs. So in the 2016-17 round, CDFA was allocated $50 million. And so that $50 million was then split between Digester, which, if you recall in the previous slide, CDFA got awarded $35.3 million for Digester projects, and then 9.8, like I mentioned, for AMP. And now, this new budget allocation, the 2017-18 funding cycle, we received $99 million. And so of those 1933 will be for AMP, and if you recall, 61 to 75 million was for Digester. So we're hoping to continue to get that funding, and so we have a significant amount of funding available this round for both Digester and AMP. And so in terms of AMP for this round, like I said, 19 to 33 million available, follows a similar pathway to the Digester. It comes from our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund pot of money, and it then comes to CDFA through an allocation, and it goes to the grant recipient. Now, unlike the digesters, which we saw can be quite large, like the Verway Hanford digester, which then the maximum that folks can get is $3 million. The AMP projects, the maximum that applicants can receive is about $750,000. And there is no match or cost share required, but we do encourage that. And a lot of the projects that were awarded last round did have matching funds. And you'll see, similar to Digester, we do also have a 2-year project implementation window. So once an applicant does get the funding, they have about 2 years to implement that project. And in this case, for this round, it'll be starting September 1st, 2018, going through August 31st, 2020. And so, yeah, so we got $99 million this round, and then hopefully in future rounds we'll get more funding. But it's a significant increase from last round, $9.8 million. Now we could potentially double, or give out even more funds for AMP projects. So with that, I kept it short and sweet. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague to talk about dairy and livestock research. Turn it back over to Katie.
Coordinated. Yeah, and so obviously there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns about dairy methane, and so we've worked very closely with our stakeholders and with ARB on research and the academic community as well. So I'm just going to kind of run through a little bit. So to date, CDFA has funded some research efforts, and basically we've used a couple of different funding sources. Either we were allowed in the very beginning to work with some funding from the GGRS, but also we coordinate closely with Dairy Cares and some industry funds that come in. So we're working, and I think really what, Secretary Ross kind of set that stage early on, like how can we capture value as well from the other co-products produced from the manure. So we've invested some research funds in that. So we have a couple of completed projects. One is just kind of recently completed that kind of is looking at evaluating different technologies, cavitation technology to reduce GHG. And then again, producing valuable co-products. We've worked recently with Dr. Rayhan John at UC Davis. So looking at some of the early work on how we might produce fertilizers from dairy manure. We actually have a couple of ongoing research projects, and diving deeper into the dairy methane and solid separation. How do these solid separators work? What is their potential for reducing methane? Because as we see these industries may be regulated in the future, if we don't get all those reductions in the voluntary, so this solid separation becomes a really important, a lot cheaper than putting in digesters. So how can the dairies reduce methane? And so that's what, so we've partnered again with Rehong Zhang, and this is an ongoing research project that's really showing some really good promise in that solid separation may play out really importantly as well. You don't always have to do the high-tech route. What else can we do? And then the second study here is benchmarking of pre-alternative manure management program dairy emissions. So we're working again with Frank Mitloehner at UC Davis to, as we put in these AMP projects that Milan talked about, what are their baseline emissions now? And then we're going to evaluate what are those emissions coming off after. We want to, because a lot of what was funded is based on this model. So we want to actually do some ground testing and make sure that we're really getting these emission reductions. So those are some of the here we go. ARB is also getting in on the act. They have some research funds as well. They really like the high-tech stuff. They are funding some airborne methane surveys, flying up and down the state and looking at what's going on up in the upper atmosphere with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And they're also doing some work on the feed side, looking at these feed additives and seeing how that reduces the enteric side of the equation. Again, and also the seaweed. And there are some research going on with some non-governmental organizations as well, and looking at Mutralin, a different feed additive in reducing methane emissions. They're working with Dr. Elias Cabral. So a lot of those research results then get folded into the work group that Ravneet talked about. And Ravneet also mentioned that, you know, there may be some other good ideas out there, and we want to capture those. And so ARB has set up a process to, you know, anybody can submit some ideas, and there's a website to do that. Any interested party can submit some ideas. I don't know whether that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get funding, but there's a way for us to capture those ideas. And then finally, as a result of the Budget Act from last year, CDFA was appropriated $250,000 to really look at the small dairy side. And so we've set up a research proposal. We just got some projects in that are going to help inform the small dairy action plan. So how small dairies are going to be at a disadvantage for methane. So what else can we do to address the small dairy sector? And so we will be probably funding a project in the very short term that will look at that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Geeta Gasu. Back cleanup here.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that's in a snapshot all of the different aspects of dairy and livestock work in our office. And just to close it out, and we talked a lot about these numbers, this many metric tons of CO2 equivalent. To put it in context and perspective for everyone, the CO2 is essentially the main, most important and commonly known greenhouse gas that we all know of. And so when we look at methane, methane can be considered up to 25 times as potent as CO2 in causing warming of the atmosphere. So when we come up with like how many tons of methane are being reduced, we then convert them into a CO2 equivalent number. And when Air Resources Board looks at this inventory for the entire state, there are other greenhouse gases as well, such as nitrous oxide. All of them are then converted into a CO2 equivalent, so we can compare apples to apples. And so this is essentially the number. Some of you might remember, so the Dairy Digester program, we calculate our methane reduction over a 10-year term. For the alternative manure management program, we calculate it over a 5-year term. And that's just related to what we think is the life of a project. specifically, like a solid separator or a spray system estimates that it's probably going to be good for at least 5 years, although it can be good for much longer. Digester, the expectation is going to be good for at least 10 years longer. So we kind of take all these numbers and then normalize them for 1 year. And if you look at that, that's the 1 year number of greenhouse gas reduction that these programs, the funded projects, are currently able to achieve. But then putting that back into perspective with the whole state methane inventory, if we look at that blue chunk over there, it's about 5.6% of that. And remember, the legislative target for California is to get to 40% of that blue chunk by 2030. So we're currently about at 5.6%, but we still need a lot more projects and a lot more investment in this whole effort. And just also for equivalencies, the USDA has a really cool tool, a simple web-based calculator. If you put in greenhouse gas 10 number, that can tell you, for example, that number is equivalent to about 135 cars being taken off the road, or it's equivalent to almost 71 million gallons of gasoline avoided with that type of renewable energy. So that's a good way to just kind of put all of this in perspective. So just very quickly closing out on the whole climate change piece, when we think about anything that's being climate smart, there are two aspects to it: mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation is let's reduce our carbon emissions so that we're not hurtling into this carbon-heavy future. But adaptation is, well, we're already seeing changes in climate, and what can we do to adapt our systems to that and become more resilient to those changes? And so everything that we talked about today, and especially the dairy livestock programs, are much more geared towards the mitigation side. That's why we're counting all these reductions so carefully all the time. But our other programs in the office, Fleet, as well as Healthy Soils program, by either changing out our irrigation systems so that farmers are better equipped to handle those drought cycles, or building that carbon in the soil, which basically just kind of provides this better water holding capacity during drought years and kind of maintains a better biodiversity, hopefully better productivity, more stable over longer term. Those ones we're hoping that we can also get at the adaptation side. So trying to address both of those, but for household, our focus right now is on the mitigation. So yeah, with that, we just want to say thank you for listening to us, and if you have any questions, and thanks for the opportunity to share with all of you the work we're doing.
Okay, so we currently have no questions online, so we'll take any questions that are on the phone. Anyone on the phone have any questions? Okay, so we'll go to the room. Any questions for the room?
So I just have a question about the 74 projects you're currently working on the digester. You know, how similar or how different are they? Are they just all the same technology, or when you do the research and when you work on these grants, how challenging is it to look at 74 projects?
Say and use intensely. It is very difficult to look at 74 projects and tease out every detail, but since we have that external panel of review, we have about 15 reviewers reviewing at least 14, 15 projects at once, and we make sure that they within 3 reviewers, so they can discuss with each other if they like the projects before they score. And so hopefully they are catching most of the, what applications or what technologies the digester are using, if there is any flaw that should be, brought up for discussion. But about the technology, we have seen that due to the SB 859, most digesters are looking for producing renewable natural gas, because electricity, although is also a way of reducing greenhouse gases, and it may produce some pollution criteria. So, and then we have some people that have some suggestions of, like how they can make the digester. It can be, a covered lagoon, for example, or a tank digester. So we will see, and then we need to take in consideration what California, what is better for California, because it could be good on the meat, of the country, but it may not work for us, so it needs to take all of this into consideration. So,
Right, and we also have to make sure these products are commercially available, they can maintain them. And so we kind of look at a lot of factors when we decide what we're doing. And it's, every round, we've gotten more than, twice as many applicants as funds available. So it's super competitive and, but the dairy industry is really responding.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I can put my question in a serious context, but a little anecdote. When I left the Philippines in 1957, the population was 20 million. 50 years later, it's about 100 million. So it is a sign of the population is growing, the resources is not growing, It's like, but coming back to this, I have a question, and I'm also in a quandary on this carbon tax question. Meaning, if one excretes more than what it is, the limited amount, and there is an extra carbon, you are going to be taxed. I mean, the cow is going to be taxed, right?
No.
The producer? The producer. No, I know what you mean, because the cow don't have.
Well, no,
clear
but you know what,
power,
we
anything like
should
that, but-
explain them, is if this regulation comes in place, it's for the industry as a whole. It's not each dairy needs to reduce by 40%. So it's the industry as a whole, and maybe that wasn't clear.
Yeah. Or the-
But however,
Thank you for
still
that.
need to,
Yeah.
we still need to get the reduction.
And the cap and trade program doesn't include, an agricultural sector, right? It's just the industry. And so then, those, if they produce more than what was their limited, then they need to pay for the carbon they are producing extra than the limit. So-
Yeah. The second part of my question is that, has there been a study, a comparative study between the production of carbon between humans and animals? Because it's like what I'm saying, poor cow. I'm related to the cow because that's my job for the last 50 years. And my point there is we're blaming the cow. How about humans?
We're
is
part of
there-
it too.
Yeah.
And we didn't, and
Exactly.
this bill we talked a little bit about, SB 1383, we talked just about the dairy side of that. That includes other methane from other productions, from the human side, and human waste and landfill. Yeah, so there's other efforts going on, and in fact, they are not getting as much money for their GHG program.
Yeah, and there's also in SB 1383, there's other short-lived time improvements as well.
Yep.
So hydrofluorocarbons, which are your refrigerant gases, your air conditioning gases, black carbon, which, there's some source from ag with the burning, but a lot of it is also coming from industry. So the short-lived climate pollutants are essentially gases that capture more heat in the atmosphere in the 20 to 30 year time scale, rather than 100 or 200 year time scale. And methane is only one of them. And we talked about it because that's what we work on, but there is a lot of regulation policies on the human side of things. The other, of course, that, it's also about changing the mindset from thinking about, this is blaming the cows. No, it's saying, look, here's a great opportunity for even more revenue from a cow than humans originally thought possible. Because not only is it going to give us milk or meat, but, let's also think about energy. Let's also think about all these other products that can then go into our other production systems. So it's really, it's very like 30,000 foot level, like it can be very broad and encompassing, and, you know, we don't need to blame the cows. We hear this a lot of times, people come up and say, oh, just, California should not have this many dairies, or there shouldn't be this many cows in the valley, oh, look at all the pollution. But here's this method by which actually we can keep all the cows we have and make them more efficient, and help with the environmental sustainability aspect.
And it's not just, when we're talking about SB 13.3, we're talking about dairy methane. And so we talked, and Rosalie mentioned this at the beginning. There's also the new overall targets under SB 32, which Governor Brown signed. And so that's really talking about overall carbon dioxide. And so that's GHGs in general. And those, if you recall, there's 5 different pillars in which to reduce those, get to those targets. Those include a bunch of other things other than just the ag sector. We're talking about, you know, energy efficiency of buildings, renewable fuels. So other things that humans can do rather than, you know, just talk about cows. So keep that in mind as well.
Just we need to be at the top of our game, so you're ready to, you know, defend the industry when it comes.
For Roberta, you mentioned external panel review.
Right.
What is the composition of that panel for academia, stakeholders, CDFA, and also are they appointed positions? And once a grant is, this is a 3-part question. Once a grant is approved, is there a follow-up review? I mean, is it just, you know, 2 years down the road?
$3 million goal.
Yeah.
So this is a very good point. So actually we have 2 layers of external panel of reviewers. We have one that we call the technical reviewers. So those are usually academia, like, so they can be, they're not from any private business. So, you know, it's within academia and scientists and all of this expertise, engineers and animal sciences mostly. And so they do the first layer of review. So we have this criteria, and so they get about half of the criteria they evaluate. And then after it comes the technical advisory committee, and those are agencies, sister agencies. So the DFA at any point is involved on the decision of, or on the reviewer process. We try, everything is outside, so we are not involved in any compensation to be biased of some developer versus the other. This is very competitive, but points of difference. And so we have Aerostar Ford, Cal Recycle, Cal EPA, they already are part of this committee. And so in this committee, they are the ones that will make the call for the grant. So after they decided what projects should be funded, so they rank them, and we'll see how much money do we have. So if we could fund 20, the first 20, we do that cut off. So just through the rank, got $75 million, we cut it there. And so after that, the secretary will do the recommendations. We'll see, like, this is the final call, and then after that, so then we'll inform the applicants that they got, but then there are several requirements from then on. So after they receive the award, they need to give us quarterly report of what they are doing, if they are getting all the permits that are necessary, if they are using the matching funds, because, you know, simultaneously with the grant money, and so we keep a very close eye on what they're doing, so everything is going okay, and it seems to be working well.
We've had an instance where someone was not checking out on these, right, and they were waiting for the biomass to kick in, like
Right.
you're talking about, because 2 years ago, the biomass program was not in place. So there was no way these digesters would have gotten a good price for their electricity. And they were waiting for the process to kick in, but then at some point, we just had to cut the cord because we couldn't wait on a $3 million grant for them to not start any work until they figured out the other things. So we definitely had to take one of those steps.
And then just in terms of follow-up, we do require them to submit annually to us their GHG numbers. And then that is then put together in a report that goes to the legislature and that's publicly available. So for all of GPRF funded programs. So there's actually a really wonderful report and a website where all this stuff is now it's available to see, you know, how are all these millions of dollars being spent and what's coming out of them. So there's being a lot of attention to that.
And then
Thanks
for,
for everything.
and then for sort of the alternative piece, the review is pretty much similar to digester. So we have technical review, technical advisory committee, and then recommendations for type of hearing. But then once the awardees are contacted, saying, you know, you received the grant, for AMP, we actually go out and do pre-project consultation. So that's going out and doing a site visit, talking to going out to the facility, make sure that, you know, we're all on the same page, and then we have to do that before they can actually sign the grant agreement and start the project. So there is sort of that check. So before that's just wanted to point that out.
And I think just kind of like, we give the money, we don't give you directly the money, we reimburse their expenses. So it's on a very, so that's even more that to prove they are doing something, so they can show the receipts and then we pay them.
You mentioned that this is drawing national attention.
Yeah.
I wondered if there were any other states that have similar programs, you know, particular states.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah. Well, I just actually was invited to go speak in New York, and New York is very interested, and but they're still trying to figure out the policies, and I mean, it's not like we just did this overnight. There's just years of policy efforts to make sure that we actually have these kind of projects available. So, but the fascinating thing is that with the low carbon fuel standard, there are dairies and projects outside of the state that can produce biogas, renewable natural gas, injected in their pipeline, and then they can count for California's low carbon fuel standard. So right now, we actually don't have any projects within California that are doing that. We have some that are in process. But everybody else is paying attention and sending the gas our way, and they can get credit for it, and that's perfectly legitimate. Yeah, and USDA also has funding available, much smaller amount. So everybody is just like, yeah, we're really going to be transforming the landscape. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Have there been, since the onset of this program, have there been any key lessons learned
Oh, yeah.
that have enhanced quality of the program, quality program?
Yeah. That's a great question.
Now, when you think about it too, I think when we first started, you know, one of the most important, I think, challenging things in 2014 for dairy digesters was that this LCFS and biomass codes did not exist. And so we didn't know how folks were going to get any kind of pricing and get the economics of their projects worked out. So we had to develop some kind of a monitoring and evaluation method which would allow us to wait until these other things were available, but at the same time then be able to say, no, we're not going to wait anymore for you. So I think in that process, we learned a lot about what it takes to actually be able to sell your electricity back to the grid. And then we have to, and it's a very long process. They have to do what is called an interconnection study, which is similar in scope and cost to like an environmental impact report. So someone from the utility has to come out to the dairy, they do a full site assessment. It's about a year to get that interconnection report done, and then the utility will actually then let you connect to the grid. So, you know, for example, that was something that helped us understand, you know, within, okay, we need to have a program that at least gives this much time to someone to build their project. So in the beginning, we didn't have a really good idea of what that might be. But we, you know, understanding what kind of different permits people need to have in place, all the different environmental permits, building permits. So based on that, then we built, you know, over the period of time, some interim timelines within our 2-year period. So we say, okay, you have 6 months to get these types of permits, or you have this much time to get this type of agreement with your utility. So basically, we learned a lot about what to monitor in those 2 years, you know, over these last 2 years. And then that really helped us out with the AMP program, because that program is, you know, someone wants to make a composting, or someone wants to do a flush to scrape, completely different type of air permit or water permit required for those types of projects. Digester is a little bit more streamlined. And then, of course, with the, the dairies being in different regions, their permitting requirements can be completely different. Central Valley has a lot of water quality issues with lagoons, so that's a whole another standard. Similar for air quality, because there's, it's a non-attainment zone for criteria pollution, NOx, and things. We had to learn a lot of that. But then we started funding these projects in Humboldt and Marin, and they don't care about any of those things. The sea breeze takes care of everything. So actually, we're in the process of right now figuring out. At the same time, we heard a lot from dairy producers. They're like, I don't know what kind of permits I need to get this project. How do I work with CFA? Are you going to tell us about permits? And we don't have permit authority. But now we're trying to put together some resources, maybe like a map tool that people can access and understand. Like, oh, these are the kind of permits I would need. For example, if I'm trying to put in a project for composting, I need these types of permits, and hopefully that's an easy resource for them to start. I think that's been like one of the biggest things.
Well, and I would just add that a key feature of all of these GGRF programs is transparency and outreach. And so as we can, we typically mostly do, we'll go out and put a draft program together, bring it out to everybody, and then get their feedback. And then we're constantly making improvements each cycle. Some of it is just a little nitty-gritty things that end up being really important. And then responding to different legislation things that are still active, requiring us to be safe.
Yeah, learning what new technology is another cool one. 2 years ago, we were like, yeah, people can get fuel cells and a digest there, and then we realized why that's not really practical. Or, for example, I think a cool change from 2015 versus 2017, we found out that, injection of RNG in the pipeline is really complicated. Utilities have some really high standards for the composition of the CNG, and dairy biogas has more impurities than fossil fuel natural gas, and it's very expensive to clean it to the same level as fossil fuel. But then we had a developer that what they are doing is they constructed a private pipeline. It's a cluster of dairies around a large bioethanol facility, and they want to take that. The gas doesn't have to be as clean as it would need to be for a PG&E pipeline. But with a private pipeline, they can send it all to the bioethanol plant and run the bioethanol plant. So all the fuel use of that plant is taken care of by dairy biogas. That wasn't something we had anticipated in 2015. We didn't know that was possible. But then we heard a lot from folks in terms of feedback, like Casey was explaining, and then we were able to, change our eligibility requirements to allow for those types of uses. But sometimes they might be sitting, waiting for many years, figuring out utility use of the biogas, that they could figure out this type of use, and it works just as well, and that makes for a more efficient project for us too. So a lot of times it's just, what are the developers and dairy producers wanting to do, and can we keep expanding the scope of our program so that we don't stop people from doing all the cool, interesting, innovative things they want to do with it.
Over the last 15 years, we've certainly, there's been a reduction in the number of dairy cows in the state. And from the perspective of Animal Health Branch, we get a lot of feedback from different dairy producers as to the reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
Some have sold their land for development, especially when prices were high.
Yeah.
Some have chosen to put that land into walnuts or almond production. We hear different environmental issues that perhaps some sell out, some go to other states where they feel the environment is a little more friendly to their industry. I find it interesting that it sounds like your projects is a very competitive environment that I believe you said maybe twice as many apply for some of these as what you can actually accept. And I was just curious as to any feedback you would have on the reduction of dairy numbers in California. Are you hearing different reasons than what we're hearing? What's your take on that?
I mean, my understanding is that the herd size has reduced somewhat, but definitely the number of dairies have decreased, right? And so we do have some herds you know, kind of maybe expanding a bit within, as long as they're within that permit size. The interesting and fascinating thing about this is ARB saying, you know, committing and working and understanding that dairy is different and that they don't win if our dairies pick up and move across to some other state where they produce just as many GHG. So it really behooves ARB to really accept a leadership role and saying, we want to, dairies are important in California, we want to keep them here, and we want to work with them. And so that's, it really has been a mindset, because ARB, they're used to regulating, you know, direct emissions. So this is a real change for them, and they are legislatively required to address leakage. And leakage is the term for picking up and moving out of state. That said, we actually approved one project, and the dairyman declined. Said, you know what? We're going to produce a nut crop, right? And so ultimately, you know, it's still, everybody's in a transition kind of, right? What are we going to set ourselves up for the future? So that's, and one thing I also want to add is that we also require financial information, detailed tax returns, and a lot of confidential stuff that the only people who we partner with our audit office, and they evaluate the financial component of the project and help us decide, are these really, you know, great investments that the state should be making, because we don't want to fund something. Secretary will get hauled in a minute, right? Funding a project and boom, they're belly up. So that's just another kind of component.
Yeah, it's really hard to, I mean, it's really hard to have any kind of impact on anyone's personal business decisions. Like, we all know that, right, when we work with farmers. But we just try to approach it from a minimizing risk perspective. So all these reviews that we do working with audits, essentially nothing but a risk assessment. And it tells us that, yeah, we've reduced our risk investment by this much by trying to do all these other things. But at the end of the day, if someone needs to sell their business and grow almonds, there's nothing we can do to stop them. So those types of things do happen. But the leakage point is so great, because if you, you know, if you're interested or want to look at that language in SB 1383, so whether it's the language in the legislation itself versus then ARB has drafted the short-lived climate solution strategy, which is a plan for the whole state. Everywhere it's preventing the closing of businesses and having them move out of state is pretty much front and center of a lot of their planning and thinking, and they have economists over at their own agency that also look into that type of stuff all the time. And another good thing is that if you look at the subgroup structure that Ravneet was talking about earlier, they're all charged with basically thinking about all the different strategies. While that big methane working group is led by the principals of the 4 agencies that we have listed, it really goes, they don't really come to the every monthly meeting. They just get a yearly report. The process is really driven by the subgroups that meet every month, and the chairs of each of those subgroups are pretty much from industry. And that in itself just, I think it goes on to show that, you know, Air Resources Board is also very committed in saying, well, what, you know, asking the industry, what are you capable of doing and what makes sense for you, instead of their traditional approach, which is let's just regulate this because we need to fix this myself now. But I interesting.
Have you looked at the average size of the dairies that have entered into your projects compared to the average size statewide?
Yes, we have. So
We had that big report.
yeah, we had a big report that actually just did these numbers last year for the case that can kind of recall. So for dairy digester program and alternate manure, we want to say upfront, both the programs are designed for dairies of every size. And, you know, when we evaluate them, we normalize their greenhouse gases by their milk production to make sure that everyone's competing at the same scale. But just the nature of the way these projects are and the way these technologies are, the digester program has turned out to be much more feasible for larger dairies. The average herd size for those 18 projects that were funded is upwards of 9,000 cows. AMP, on the other hand, has turned out to be much more for the smaller to mid-sized dairies, and I think the average there is right around 1,200, or actually it might even be 900 something cows. 1,219 is the average California dairy. So it just happens to be so that, you know, they seem to be serving two different groups.
Well, and the fact that digesters, we require a 50% cost share, and so these developers actually come in, and so they're gonna obviously try and find a project where they can take advantage of that larger scale. And especially if they're going to renewable natural gas, there's other infrastructure needed, they're building out these clusters, and so those are super big investments, so.
And that guarantee of energy on their agreement with the utility, so they need at least a certain number of cows to be able to produce enough manure to guarantee that energy production to get their contract.
Sure.
What type of cost principles do you use to oversee the program? In other words, besides that, you know, various cost principles depending on the type of agency that is awarded from. What do you use? Or did you develop your own kind of? Like a grant program?
Right, well, you know what, that's a good point, because we didn't really talk about how, there's all of us here, but we partner, we have staff with the Office of Grants Administration. And they are the ones who are looking at the reports and the invoices, and so once the project gets approved, we're scrutinizing the budgets as they come in. Does this make sense? And then as we, you know, manage the grant and invoices come in, then we kind of operate on the reimbursement basis. Oh, yeah, well, go ahead.
So the California Air Resources Board also has developed a giant document called Funding Guidelines for DGRF Administrative Agencies. So across the board, all the different agencies who administer cap and trade dollars have to follow these guidelines. And they have many requirements in there, for example, for transparency, for how much of a public process we should be doing at all times at a minimum, the kind of information we should always be posting on our website, levels of review that must take place for specific types of projects, and then the post-project reporting criteria. All of those things are developed by Air Resources Board. Another key component from Air Resources Board is what they call investments in disadvantaged communities. So again, there's a legal requirement that 25% of all cap and trade investments must occur in what are called disadvantaged and low-income communities in California. And California has a tool by which they can determine that. And it's called CalEnviroScreen, and they use a comprehensive index of like 18 different indicators to determine which census tracts in the state are specifically disadvantaged. And while our programs do not have to meet a mandated disadvantaged community investment requirement, we still report. Like if we have projects that are located in those regions and they're creating jobs over there, then that's the kind of data we do also collect and report back. So that's another piece that is specifically for administration of new grants that applies. So a lot of admin requirements by Air Resources Board, and then all other kinds of typical requirements that apply on any kind of state contracts and state grant agreements that OGA helps us meet as well.
Okay. All right, thank you. As you can see, the Office of Farming and Innovation is relatively new.